Hey, what's up? Now, today we are going to be talking about this specific pair right here. This is the Quadio from Kefine, and it is a dual BA and dual DD setup. It costs $130 which is within the very competitive entry point for a lot of IEMs. And all I could say at the moment is definitely this thing is doing something other people are trying to do. Let's talk about it. Now for the Quadio specifically, I would say again, for the price point, $130, there's definitely a lot of people that are competing within that price category, and they are definitely trying their best to give you their specialty. In terms of specialty, there can only be, that many amounts of types of tuning, and whether that can be implemented or integrated very well or not will be very subjective. I will personally think that, with the consent of a lot of people in the community, that the Quadio is honestly quite a good pair of IEMs. And before we do anything, y'all know my shtick. Unboxing time. I quite enjoy the fact that this pair of IEMs really gives you a lot for the accessories. And there's also some small things that I like to mention, which is the main, I would say probably the main selling point of this IEM. Other than your standard case with the balanced and unbalanced modular connectors from the very nice braided cable, you are getting a lot of tips. 2 sets of tips. Well, specifically, I think it's 4 sets. One is a white translucent one, and one is a black translucent one, where there are 2 types of borehole sizes. One is a normal size, and one is a semi-wide type of size. You can have a lot of modularity. But wait, there's more. Due to the fact that this thing already has this much of customization, you can customize it further with these right here. These are nozzle filters, which, is something very nostalgic. Now, the default nozzle is the silver color one right here, but if let's say you feel like this thing could use a little bit more of a spiciness to it, this thing could be a little bit more brighter, you could just use the gold nozzle. A lot of people have been saying that this thing increases treble extension for the gold nozzle specifically. I don't really hear that. I mainly hear more of an elevation in mids, specifically vocals, and I personally feel like it's getting a little bit shouty, as well as making something that is just alright into potential sibilances here and there. Like, it's borderline sibilant, so I don't enjoy that particular nozzle set. But I quite enjoy the other one, which is the black one. Overall, it has a more laid-back presentation and gives you a slight warm tinge overall. So, quite a nice pair to relax to when you are changing it into that configuration. But other than that, not really much I could talk about with the build other than, it's CNC aluminum, CNC metal, and, it has a symmetrical, very simple design to it. As for the fit, what I could say is that I've worn this for around like 3 hours straight yesterday while I'm doing something. Overall, this thing sounds great with the fact that it has no fatigueness at all. I would personally think that even though when you're grabbing this, it feels kind of slippery, when it goes into your ear, everything is alright. And with all that out of the way, let's talk about the sound. This thing overall, for my first impressions on these, is that it has a very impressive full range, where everything is very coherent, everything complements each other very well, and it overall has a slight U-shaped sound to it. Best way I could describe is that the mids and up overall has a Harman characteristic to it. One more first impressions is that soundstage is very good for this price point. When I first listened to this, y'all probably know I usually do not like to talk about subscribe. Why did I talk about subscribe? But anyways, whatever, shamelessly, could you subscribe? Could you comment? Could you like? It definitely helps out the channel. Why did I suddenly go off on a tangent? Anyways, I usually do not like to know about the pricing prior to listening to this. And when I first listened to this, my initial impressions is that this thing is probably somewhere close to $200 or 1K MYR. But to my surprise, it's only 130 USD. So it is doing quite well in that certain aspect, which I personally want to find in an IEM. Because if you have a wide enough presentation, everything will sound better. Anyways, for tonality, this thing overall is quite neutral. Some people say that it has a slight warmish tinge to it. I do not find that unless I'm using the black nozzle. And in terms of timbre, I would say the best way to describe this is with this word wispy. It's not airy. You feel like it's like a wisp rather than it's an abundance of air. For the review sake, I will only be reviewing this in the default nozzle. Starting off with the bass, I would say for this pair right here, it is quite plentiful, it is quite adequate, nothing fancy but nothing really lacking. And personally, I feel like for the bass, it really comes down to the mix of the song as well as the bitrate. If you're using something that is high res, you'll definitely feel like why is the sub bass a little bit lacking. You feel like it is well dispersed overall but lacking. If you're using something like on YouTube, it will punch you a lot, it will rumble a lot. It gives you a lot of the amplitude that you are seeking. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's the sub bass. For lower and mid bass overall, everything sounds quite dynamic and quite fluid within it, with enough levels of diffusion and that wispy overtone accompanying it. 808s overall, I would say, are quite nice because I mainly listen to hip hop. This thing overall sounds quite fun, quite bouncy, quite good texture, but also with the fact that it sounds fast, it sounds quick. Kicks, drums overall sound quite thumpy with enough levels of that wispy air that you are getting. Moving on to the vocals. Vocals overall are quite transparent and neutral, and I would say it's, overall just clean with a decent amount of emotion. I would personally say that for vocals, females definitely sound a little bit better than males. Males might sound less harmonious due to the fact that it is slightly, under that part of the frequency graph, which might be a factor. I'm not really sure. But one certain thing that I don't know why, male vocals specifically, I sometimes do tend to hear some nasaliness from the voices, which is kind of weird. For female vocals, they don't really have that level of issue. Note weight overall is quite good for a vocalist, and I would say overall it has quite a shining and resolving presentation to everything. Sibilance, not really, but for some people, they might say it's a little bit shouty, so your mileage may vary. Me personally, on default, everything is quite fine. Moving on to the most interesting part of the section, which is talking about the mids. The best way for me to describe the mids is that, it's very clean. It's very luscious. There's not really that much I could say other than those two words, as well as probably, for the overtones, again, it has that very wispiness to it. And specifically for tracks that involves woodwinds, which is like flutes, clarinets, as well as strings, it overall just utilizes that overtone thing very, very well. I would say everything sounds very realistic, everything sounds very harmonious and complements each other very well. Yeah. And with the fact that I mentioned that this pair right here has a very good amount of soundstage, the staging actually improves the mids, with the fact that despite everything sounds quite big, it is not congested or muddled with each other. Moving on to the upper mids and the treble, I would say overall for the texture, for the tracks, every single thing again is quite clean with a good amount of treble extension. But again, the treble extension in this pair again specifically is wispy. Has rides and cymbals, everything sounds very organic, which is quite good. Aggressiveness, not really. Some people might complain this pair to be slightly aggressive. It sounds energetic, but not to the point where it is starting to hit you too much. Let me just put a little bit of a tangent. I don't know why, but specifically for this pair right here, the tuning makes it sound like it has a planar magnetic inside. Like initially, again, I did not notice what kind of hybrid this is. I thought it was like a DD and a planar type of hybrid. So when I listened to this, I was like, yeah, that thing is honestly quite crispy. That thing has a planar, but when I realized it does not have a planar, I'm quite surprised the fact that it has this level of characteristics to it. But yeah, basically just using the default nozzle already gives you that level of planar magnetic bite, which in my opinion is quite good. It adds on to the flavor of the whole track. It gives you that level of energy and emotion. Moving on to the technicalities, dynamics overall, none else to complain. This thing overall is quite above average. It really does its own thing quite well. Soundstage, again, first impressions, thought this was closer to 1K MYR. Enough reach and enough depth. And with that good amount of staging, the imaging and the separation definitely also benefits from it as well. The pinpoint accuracy might be a little bit bigger rather than being very specific, but it's only $130. You really cannot complain for what you are getting right here. But one thing that I would say is probably the slight con of this pair is detail retrieval. I noticed after a while, like maybe 2 to 3 tracks in, is that after the tuning kind of sets into me, I feel like this thing is definitely not a technical pair. It is mainly used for enjoyment purposes, where I only feel like the expression of macro details are quite prominent. But despite the macros sounding quite full and complex, I cannot really find the micros to be that level of amazing. Like, the micros are there, but first of all, it's quite lacking, and second of all, there is no dynamicness to it. You can't truly notice that it's there until you purposely try to go and search for it. That is how I feel about this certain pair. And just to wrap the whole thing up, what are my final thoughts on the Quadio? I think the main selling point is that this thing is very musical. Everything, the whole frequency response is very complementing each other very well. There's that certain type of feeling that this thing is giving me where I feel like, tracks are just so coherent together. They can definitely complement each other very well when I'm listening to this set. Despite the fact that, like I said, there's not really that much micro details. Macros are expressing themselves so well that, I could probably just not bat an eye about not being too clinical, which probably proves a point for me personally because I really value technical prowess, but this thing really gives me musical enjoyment. So with all that being said, for people who definitely want a pair that is purely for enjoyment, check this pair out. You definitely won't regret it. I'll put all the links below. And oh yeah, once again, thank you AudioMonsta for sending these pair my way. Definitely a very good set. And with all that being said, stay tuned for the next video. I still got a lot of stuff for you guys coming real soon. So yeah, thank you for watching. Take care.